Our next speaker is Dr. Onel Brooks. He's particularly interested in philosophy and psychoanalysis. Dr. Brooks is a core member of the SAFPAC teaching team and a senior lecturer in psychotherapy, counseling, and counseling psychology at Roehampton University. He's CP accredited and UK CP registered as psychoanalytic psychotherapist and as an existential analytic psychotherapist. He worked for many years with adolescents and adults in therapeutic communities, the NHS, and voluntary organizations, as well as universities. He is also a contributor to the teaching at the Philadelphia Association. Today, Dr. Brooks' topic is looking like a foreigner, sorry. Forgiveness and conformity and compliance in psychoanalysis. Let's welcome Dr. Onel Brooks.
Okay, first of all, thank you for introducing me. And can you sort of nod your head or something if you can hear me fine? Good, thank you. So I'm going to say a little bit about a paper called Looking Like a Foreigner, then refer to the work of the philosopher Richard Rorty to help to bring out how the paper, and dare I say Rorty too, are against evidence-based psychotherapy practice. That certainly can be read like that. Looking Like a Foreigner, the paper, was written in response to a request from an orthodox training in psychoanalysis to speak about the universal applicability of psychoanalysis with respect to race and culture. Now, maybe I should say that about 3 times, because the first time I read that, I had no idea what they were asking me to do. And it took me a while until I got to somewhere where I thought, oh, okay, maybe that's what I could do. Whether or not that's what they wanted me to do is another matter. I don't know. Anyway, as I've said, I was asked to speak about the universal applicability of psychoanalysis with respect to race and culture. So I think what happened to me was I went through all this thing about not understanding and, thinking a bit about foreignness and being an outsider, certainly to more orthodox versions of psychoanalysis. And eventually I sat down and started to construct a paper. And this paper takes a skeptical view of the claim or assumption that psychoanalysis is to be regarded as universally applicable, and that a training in psychoanalysis prepares a practitioner to engage thoughtfully and honestly with race and culture. Using the author's own experience in and outside of the consulting room, it argues that although psychoanalysis tends to treat race and culture as if they are marginal and optional, in its theorizing, its practice, and the history of psychoanalysis, what is betrayed is the fact that race, culture, and the treatment of what is regarded as foreign are central and fundamental to psychoanalysis. The paper argues that to approach another person confident that we are in possession of universally applicable concepts and ideas is to begin in the wrong place with that person and our ideas. It is to begin as someone who is well armed, well trained, and perhaps too focused on succeeding by finding what they are already looking for. Looking carefully at the particular, looking like a foreigner, who has never seen what is before them, is contrasted with looking like someone who is concerned with conquest, domination, being reassured, who is looking in order to be reassured. Now, I guess it's easy to sort of avoid saying very much about where this paper comes from. I mean, I say a lot about my own personal experience, which I won't attempt to repeat or to talk about my client work in this sort of setting. But I've been a therapist of one sort for over 30 years. And what I say in that paper is 30 years ago, it was common practice to run psychoanalytic trainings, giving very little consideration to race, culture, class, history, and the socio-political context in which we work. Has this changed? Now, after 4 or 5 years on a more orthodox psychoanalytic training, some of the trainees and those charged with teaching them may, yielding to a lurking disquiet, seek to appease a sense of something being amiss by tacking on a few seminars about race and, or tellingly, difference, and other, I should say difference as it clearly in quotations, and other features of the socio-political context onto the end of what is presented as the really important matter, that being the transmission of a body of knowledge or thinking called psychoanalysis. So 3 riffs or 3 themes can be heard quite clearly in this paper, I hope. The first is that of looking like or seeming to be a foreigner, and our attempt to escape this, to look different, to seem out of place, to seem strange. The second is the ability to look or see as if we are foreign, not from here, from somewhere else. So I'm talking about our ability to look as if we are from somewhere else, as if we are foreign to things that we see every day. Third, in this paper, is the idea that we might look like a foreigner or outsider at psychoanalysis in particular, and consider it as part of the history of Europe. So not just look like an insider wanting to apply this and that, but to try to look at it as something that a practice or a set of ideas that had evolved in a particular historical situation. But what does the term orthodox mean? If orthodoxy means relating or conforming to the approved form of the doctrine, philosophy, ideology, or set of beliefs, then one of the problems with orthodoxy is that it tends to take for granted, rather than be interested in, how one version became traditional, normal, acceptable. Orthodoxy, as being too comfortably knowing about who to listen to, how to listen, who and what needs to be kept out and looked away from, does not sit well with the practice of psychotherapy, or so this paper argues. It claims that if psychoanalysts or any forms of psychotherapy thinks of and presents itself as applying a universally applicable body of knowledge to all people, without careful attention to time, place, and the particularities of the people involved, including class, race, culture, gender, it is trading on or exploiting, making calculated or thoughtless use of the cultural trope of the scientist or expert who is closely related to the scientist. I say it's not only orthodox trainings that teach trainees to do it properly, when doing something properly is a way of not doing it differently, a quote from Adam Phillips. There is a problem if psychotherapy trainings offer people ways of looking like an insider, doing things properly and becoming one of us. But when we are faced with clients, it is crucial that we can look like a foreigner at what is taking place, what we have been told, and how we're tempted to react, and so on. Psychoanalysis, this paper argues, can be an invitation to appreciate and welcome foreignness and see how we too are foreign to ourselves rather than just orthodox. So I say in the paper, there could be more attention to how psychoanalysis fits into the history of Europe, how, for instance, notions of primitive peoples and civilized peoples existed before psychoanalysis designated some areas of the mind primitive and others civilized and rational. And I say that notions of race and culture are around in even, say, things like Ferenzi's paper of the confusion of tongues, because I think that the idea there that's been played with there is that this is a meeting between two people from two cultures who would struggle to understand each other. And I also say things like, to some extent, Ferenczi was regarded as or made into a foreigner in orthodox psychoanalysis. He was said to be psychotic and said to be doing all sorts of things you ought not to be doing. So I think it might help our discussion if we refer to Richard Rorty's work. In Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature, Rorty, following Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science, distinguishes between normal and, this is Thomas Kuhn's distinction between normal and revolutionary science. Rorty, following him, writes of normal and abnormal discourse. Normal science is the practice of solving problems against a consensus of what counts as a good explanation, what it would mean for a problem to be solved. So the important thing is that the consensus is already established. It is when we are agreed on what it is to be rational, how to evaluate what is said, how to decide what is relevant. On the other hand, revolutionary science is taking place when a new paradigm for explaining, thinking, and treating the world is being introduced. So clearly, revolutionary science is the idea, Kuhn's idea, that there is a shift from one paradigm to another. So I think he talks about Galileo, rather the Newtonian paradigm to the Einsteinian paradigm. Abnormal discourse, Rorty's term, is what happens when someone joins a discussion but is ignorant of the conventions or orthodoxies, who sets them aside or challenges or undermines them. Normal discourse has much to do with staying inside orthodoxy and comfortable sameness. Abnormal discourse has more to do with letting difference in not being clear what is what and who must be listened to, with encounters with foreignness. Psychotherapy trainings may behave as if they are normal discourse. But when we are meeting clients, we may quickly realize that the situation is ripe for abnormal discourse and a confusion of tongues. Evidence-based practice might make more sense when we have the agreement and orthodoxy of normal discourse. So I'm
just 5 minutes left.
5 minutes?
5 minutes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll finish this off very quickly then.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but that will include the questions as well in that 5 minutes.
Okay, I won't be long. So the last thing, again, is from Rorty, and this is the epigraph to Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity. And he quotes Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera says, pardon my Greek, that the agalestes, is Rabelais' word for those who do not laugh. The non-thought of received ideas and kitsch are one and the same. The three-headed enemy of the art born of the echo of God's laughter. The art that created the fascinating, imaginative realm where no one owns the truth and everyone has the right to be understood. This is the realm of the novel. We might read this as saying that those who do not laugh or have a sense of humor, who cannot appreciate and value folly, irony, being surprised, confused, but may insist on measuring humor and its use in psychotherapy, those who want the safety of orthodoxy and normal discourse, and those who can only appreciate what is gaudy, obvious, popular, and easily subjected to measurement, are the enemies of a realm in which no one owns the truth and every voice deserves to be heard, even the strange and foreign voices that seem to make no sense, sound funny, and cannot easily be assessed in terms of what they've contributed to the conversation. This is to present psychotherapy as at least potentially abnormal and revolutionary discourse. And those who insist on calling for evidence and evidence-based practice as seeking to impose and enforce normal science discourse even here. The last few lines, then I will stop, is from Kundera himself, who says, "No peace is possible between the novelists and the Agalaste. Never having heard God's laughter, the Agalistes are convinced that truth is obvious, that all men necessarily think the same thing, and that they themselves are exactly what they think they are. But it is precisely in losing the certainty of truth and the unanimous agreement of others that man becomes an individual." That's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brooks. It's kind of like, it feels like we have such a little time for questions, and it's kind of such a huge topic. And I'm just wondering if anyone wants to say something in like under 2 minutes we've got left. There's lots about like the way I was hearing it as well, a foreigner as a kind of as a otherness, yeah, and our kind of like position towards otherness, and the references to Ferenczi were quite appropriate in my view from that kind of perspective in terms of like our psychotic position when we see something, when we hear something we don't recognize. But yes, just like anyone wants to say anything.
Yeah, I really appreciate the connection made between normal science and revolutionary science and the practice of psychotherapy. I think that's, I mean, I know Kuhn rather well, but I never quite thought of it as this way of thinking about therapeutic practice, and I think that's a very useful idea.
Okay, so it's 11:30, I believe, in London, right? Are we happy to move on to our next speaker?